The opening notes of the show were quiet. Rachel Maddow didn't use her usual upbeat tone. She didn't offer a clever lead-in. She looked straight into the camera and said, "Tonight, we're joined by former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi. This conversation will not be comfortable, but I hope it will be honest." The camera cut. Pam Bondi walked on set in a dark suit and heels that didn't echo when she walked, because she didn't come to announce herself. She came already standing in her argument. She shook Rachel's hand. No smile, no chill, just a professional grip between two women who both understood the power of posture. They sat. Rachel adjusted her glasses and began. "Ms. Bondi," she said, "you've built a reputation for defending policies and people many believe do real harm. Some say you're a skilled legal mind shielding the indefensible. Others say you're a principled voice in a polarized world. Which do you believe?" Pam responded immediately. "I believe I say the thing most people don't want to hear, and I don't apologize for that." Rachel didn't nod. She just asked the next question. "And if the thing you say causes pain?" Pam answered, "Then maybe the pain isn't from the words. Maybe it's from the mirror." The air in the studio shifted. Rachel's tone never changed, but her questions did. "Let's talk about the election," she said. "You've defended claims that courts rejected, that officials disproved, that even your former allies have walked away from. Do you still stand by that defense?" Pam's voice was steady. "I stand by the idea that legal process should be allowed to play out without media pressure shaping public conclusion." Rachel leaned forward. "And when that process is exploited?" Pam didn't blink. "Then the system corrects it, not the commentary." Rachel countered, voice quiet but unflinching. "And who corrects the consequences left behind when millions believe something that isn't true?" Pam looked at her, calm. "You think belief is the problem. I think silence is." No one moved. Even the crew behind the cameras stayed still. Because something was happening between them that didn't require volume. Just wait. Rachel picked up a note card, then set it back down. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "if defending power makes you complicit in what that power does?" Pam said, "No more than you wonder if interrogating power ever protects the people who were already losing." Rachel paused. Longer this time. Not because she didn't have a follow-up. Because Pam had just matched her tone and refused to yield. Rachel Maddow picked up a pen she hadn't used. She didn't write. She just held it. Pam Bondi hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't dodged. But she also hadn't softened. And the more Rachel pressed, the more it became clear Pam wasn't here to debate. She was here to outlast. Rachel asked, "Do you believe your legal defense of political figures has helped reinforce public trust in the law?" Pam answered plainly, "I don't think the public trusts the law. I think they trust their side." Rachel tilted her head slightly. "Then what's your role in that?" Pam's reply came without pause. "To remind people that justice isn't a feeling." There was no applause. There wasn't supposed to be. Rachel pressed again. "You speak of discipline. But what about truth? When you defend people who've lied, not ambiguously, but plainly, what does discipline become then?" Pam didn't blink. Truth is not always pure, and justice isn't always pretty. Rachel leaned forward, voice steady. "So you'll defend anything as long as it's lawful?" Pam replied, "No, I'll defend what I believe deserves to be heard, even if you hate the sound of it." Rachel paused, then said, "What if the sound of it breaks something?" Pam didn't move. Then maybe it was already cracked. Behind the camera, a boom operator shifted slightly, not to reposition, to exhale. Because no one in the studio had taken a deep breath since the segment began. Rachel looked down at her notes, then closed the folder. "There's a question I ask when I don't know how else to move forward," she said. Pam waited. Rachel asked, "Do you believe history will forgive you?" Pam didn't flinch. "I'm not waiting on forgiveness. I'm answering to something quieter." Rachel asked, "Like what?" Pam's voice didn't rise. "Conscience. The kind that doesn't ask to be applauded, just obeyed." Rachel didn't respond right away, because it wasn't a response moment. It was a recognition moment. Of two women who wouldn't move, wouldn't fold, wouldn't yield, and still weren't finished. Rachel Maddow had nothing left on the desk in front of her. No notes, no pen, no cards, just her hands, folded neatly. Pam Bondi hadn't shifted once in her seat. She sat like someone who'd been asked every question before and still chose to answer them again, not to convince, but to stand still long enough that no one could say she flinched. Rachel asked, "What do you believe this interview is doing right now?" Pam looked at her, eyes level. "I think it's disappointing people who came for a villain." Rachel didn't deny it. She said, "Some would say you came to provoke." Pam shook her head once. "No. I came to remind people that clarity doesn't always come with a smile." Rachel let that settle, then asked, "Do you think you've become a symbol of something you didn't intend?" Pam's voice dropped, but not in tone, in weight. "Yes, but that's what happens when the room wants a symbol more than it wants a sentence." Rachel asked softly, "And what's the sentence you'd leave us with?" Pam didn't pause. She said, "Disagree with me. Dismantle my arguments. But don't confuse your discomfort with my dishonor." The room didn't move, because nothing she said was loud. But everything she said landed like a closing argument with no jury, just an audience used to being affirmed. In the control room, the audio engineer whispered. She didn't change the subject. She made it sit up straighter. No one responded, because everyone was still watching. Rachel Maddow sat back. There were no more questions. There was no need. She looked at Pam and said, "You knew this would make people angry." Pam nodded. "I didn't come here to be safe. I came here to be seen." And with that, she stood, unrushed, unapologetic. She didn't shake Rachel's hand, not out of disrespect, out of finality. She had already said what she came to say, and she didn't need the exit line to prove she meant it. The red light above the camera went out. No music played, no studio laughter, just the quiet sound of chairs being pushed back and crew returning to motion, as if the room had been holding its breath and only just remembered how to exhale. Rachel Maddow remained seated. She didn't shuffle her papers. She didn't glance at producers. She just looked at the space Pam Bondi had occupied seconds earlier. It still felt full. Pam didn't speak to anyone as she left the stage. She didn't look over her shoulder. She didn't check how she'd done. She already knew. Backstage, a producer approached Rachel cautiously. "Do you want to record an outro?" Rachel shook her head. "If they didn't hear it the first time," she said, "they weren't listening." The producer nodded and walked away. That night, the segment didn't air. No explanation. No promo. Rachel opened the next broadcast with a different story, a different guest, a different rhythm. But something in her tone had shifted. A quieter edge. A sharper stillness. In the edit bay, the full footage was saved. Not because it would run. Because no one wanted to delete it. The editor labeled it with a simple title. Bondi, no cut. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi flew home. No interviews. No recap tweets. No press releases. She sat alone in row 3A, arms crossed, watching the clouds move beneath the wing. Across the aisle, a woman whispered to her partner, "That's her." From Maddow. Pam didn't react. She'd heard it before. She knew the sound of being recognized for not apologizing. At a law school in Boston, a professor played the unaired interview to a room of students. They watched in silence. When it ended, the professor turned to the class and asked, "What did she do?" One student finally said, "She didn't argue. She just refused to bend." Another said, "I think that's what stunned the room." The professor nodded and left the screen dark. In the weeks that followed, the interview became a rumor. People who worked at the network spoke about it in side conversations. It wasn't scandalous. It wasn't viral. It was just unfinished. Someone would say, "Did you see the Bondi segment?" And someone else would reply, "They never aired it, but I heard she didn't back down." That was the headline people passed around. Not a quote, not a gaffe. Just the fact that she didn't back down. In a journalism ethics class in Chicago, the professor handed out a transcript of the unaired interview. No names. No context. Just the words. The assignment was simple. Read this. Then tell me who had power. Half the class circled Rachel's questions. The other half circled Pam's answers. One student wrote in the margin, "The most powerful person in the room is the one who doesn't care if she's misunderstood." Rachel Maddow didn't bring Pam Bondi's name up again. She didn't explain why the segment never ran. But her tone changed in the weeks after. She interrupted less. She paused longer. And when a guest spoke with certainty, the kind that doesn't look for audience approval. Rachel let the moment hold, because now she knew what it felt like to sit across from someone who didn't need the segment to land, didn't need the crowd to clap, and didn't need the final word to win. Pam Bondi received no awards for the interview. She didn't write an op-ed. She didn't repost praise. But something shifted in how people addressed her. In emails, in courtrooms, in off-the-record conversations. They didn't say, "I saw the segment." They said, "I heard what happened." And that was enough. Because now, even people who had never agreed with her understood one thing clearly. She didn't show up to survive the moment. She showed up to stand in it. Pam Bondi stood in a courthouse hallway weeks later, leather briefcase in one hand, phone tucked under her arm. She'd just finished a closed-door mediation. Her client had lost. Gracefully, an opposing attorney, younger, sharp, cautious, walked up to her and said, "I don't agree with a single thing you stood for in that interview." Pam turned. The woman added, "But I've never seen someone carry disagreement like armor without turning it into a weapon." Pam gave the smallest nod. "That's because it was never about the fight," she said. "It was about standing where I wasn't supposed to and not moving." The woman didn't smile, but she understood. She walked away in silence. Pam stayed, just for a moment, long enough to remember that sometimes presence was the most disarming response a person could give. Rachel Maddow, 3 months later, was prepping for a panel at a journalism conference. The moderator asked what the hardest interview she'd ever done was. Rachel didn't name Pam. She just said, "The hardest moments aren't when someone argues. They're when someone doesn't need the room to like them." The moderator asked if that made it harder to listen. Rachel paused, then said, "It made it impossible not to." The footage never aired. It never had to. The people who were in the room carried it with them. The people who weren't heard about it anyway. Not as a scandal, not as a spectacle, as a reminder that sometimes the most disruptive thing a woman can do on camera is tell the truth without asking permission first, and leave without waiting for anyone to clap.